Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. This weekend I got to go to the botanical garden. They had a free day, so I went to go check that out. And it turns out the reason it was free is because everything's pretty much dead. But I got a fall festive drink of pumpkin spice and apple pie and sunshine and a few other ingredients. And I walked around with my autumn festive cornucopia of flavors and enjoyed the dead flowers. And it made me reflect on the beginning of the summer season when the flower shops or Lowe's or Walmart or wherever gets their first shipment of flowers. And often there is a rack of rejects, the ones that are considered dead and a lost cause, and they're, marked down to $1 and just written off as being, not good flowers. They're not like the others. And those are the flowers I tend to go after, number one, because they're $1, but they also, with a little bit of love and nurturing and a little more extra attention, end up being the most beautiful flowers of all my flowers. And they're hardier. They last longer through the summer than any of my other flowers and tend to be the most vibrant, beautiful of them all because they're stronger and they've overcome near-death experiences, I guess you could say. And just like the flowers are considered, to be a lost cause and to be damaged goods and unsalvageable, that's often how society writes off or labels those with substance issues as being a lost cause or permanently labeled. Even those that have worked so hard through recovery are still labeled as recovering addicts. They still are given that title of addict, and with that comes a lot of societal stigmas that those with substance abuse addictions are deceptive and they steal, and they're always going to be a certain way, and they're held captive to that old version of themselves regardless of the recovery efforts and sobriety efforts of that individual. So what better way to mark someone as othered, as being a lost cause, as being damaged goods, than to smear their name and spread rumors that they're a substance user. Because again, they will indefinitely have that stigma, that label, which will affect their ability to get a job. They'll get side-eyed at the store that they're going to commit theft. People aren't going to trust them in their homes. They're going to be treated and gossiped about and whispered about in a very stigmatic and negative way. And, as I've worked in shelters, going into the shelters to teach workshops on life skills or art classes or anger management, domestic violence, education, things like that, one thing that's really impressed me the most about that population is, say it's a homeless shelter, the residents there aren't generally just battling, overcoming homelessness. They may have coinciding legal cases. They may be going through treatment for addiction. They may be facing trauma from domestic violence or other, traumatic events in their life. They could be stalking victims that are trying to stay safe. They're trying to fight to get their children back. They're facing every problem a person could generally face. And so to me, those that go through those situations and come out sober and overcome all those obstacles placed upon them are some of the strongest, hardiest people you'll ever meet. They're so resilient and have worked their tails off to reach sobriety. And, those going through treatment for addiction and trying to overcome that bondage, they often have to leave behind their support system, their friends, their community, their coping mechanisms, their habits. Everything about their life has to change in order to achieve that sobriety and to maintain it. And so as a culture, if we're holding people to an old version of themselves after they've worked so hard, it's so unjust and so unsupportive for somebody who has overcome so much to reach a milestone in their life for their health and benefit, and then society's still saying, well, they're a recovering addict, and that stigma follows them, whether it's in a custody case or, applying for jobs, or the way they're treated in the community, that label follows them, much like the lepers in the scriptures that were othered and permanently ostracized. But in a smear campaign, whether somebody's never had substance issues and it's being fabricated, a manufactured story to do permanent and damaging harm to them by labeling them in this way, or if somebody has had a history of substance issues and a smear campaign is being used to hold them captive to an old version of themselves despite all their growth and progress, it is incredibly damaging and labels a person as being a lost cause in such a way that will follow them throughout their life. And so when you hear somebody speaking about somebody having substance issues, there's a few things that you should ask yourself. In a court of law, we're considered innocent until proven guilty. But in a smear campaign, it's basically assumed that the individual being spoken about in a negative way is already guilty of what's being said. In the way that those gossipers are communicating and the way it's circulating, it's as if it's already been proven to be a reality. And people hearing the gossip will treat it as such, that they're already guilty without giving them a chance to defend themselves. Nobody asks the targeted individual their side of the story. There's no fact checking. They don't get a chance to prove their innocence. So you have to ask yourself, when somebody's engaging in this kind of a smear campaign, what is their motive? Obviously, nothing positive comes to a person having others speak about them having substance issues. Whether they're real or not, there's incredible damage that will come to them. It could involve, false police investigations and being treated differently by the community. They could lose their job, they could lose their housing, they could lose their kids. So what would be the motive that somebody would do that much harm to another and jeopardize so many areas of their life? Because really, if you can label someone falsely with substance issues, you can be quite destructive to their life, do a large amount of damage to them. So is it, you're envious of them, you don't like them, and you're discriminating against them? You are targeting them for what reason? What is the motive? Because there's no positive motive in spreading and circulating a story that someone has substance abuse issues. Nextly, you're going to notice shifts in the narrative and people telling the story about someone having substance issues. Well, did you see them? No, I heard it from so-and-so. And their story's going to constantly be changing because people who lie can't remember what they said. And these shifts in the narrative are a good red flag that you're dealing with somebody who's part of a smear campaign that's targeting an innocent person and dragging their name through the mud in one of the cruelest ways possible by trying to stigmatize them as a substance user. There's going to be inconsistent documentation. So in a custody case, or in a legal case, or in a police investigation, suddenly this person has in their medical record that they're a substance user. That's strange. They've never had a DUI. It's never been in their medical history before, but now there's suddenly a professional testifying and saying this person has addiction issues and this and that. There's going to be an inconsistency in that. And this is where we're going to see corruption in the medical field and potentially law enforcement in police reports that'll portray somebody as being a user, but there's no actual real proof or history to support it. And lastly, it's just not adding up. You see the person, the targeted individual that they're smearing, and they're functioning, they look healthy, they're doing the best they can despite all the cruelty they're experiencing. It's just not adding up that they would be the type of user you're claiming for them to be. And in red here, legal consequences. All someone has to do is go get those false police reports and go take a drug test that shows that they're not on substances. And here's all the perjury, the false statements, the false police reports. There's civil liability that can be had there. There's criminal charges that can be pressed on somebody who's making police reports falsely or providing false statements in court. That's obstruction of justice. That's a serious crime. So If you assume someone has substance issues, or you've heard someone has substance issues, that's not a fact. And you spreading and circulating that information can not only have consequence for the victim that you're targeting, but for the person committing that crime or that civil act against another person, causing permanent damage and stigmatizing them in a permanent way. And to those who have worked so hard to achieve sobriety and maintain that sobriety, I feel for you, because it is so unfair to be permanently stigmatized by past mistakes that we have made. We all make mistakes in life. And for those who are going around labeling and pointing the finger at others, how would you like it if every mistake you made in your life was circulated years later and that was your permanent identity? Recognize and support people that have really overcome a lot and proven their hardiness and their resilience. And I would just lastly leave you with this thought. When Jesus was on the earth, he wasn't spending time with those that had their lives together, that went to church on Sundays. He spent his time with those who were struggling, helping, supporting, teaching those who were struggling with various issues in life. And that's how we're to treat others. We're not supposed to other them like, oh, you have a problem, you stay over there, I'm better than you. We're supposed to be loving and supportive to those struggling, because each and every one of us is a child of God with infinite value. And just because someone is struggling with an addiction doesn't make it okay to other or belittle them and see yourself as being above them. And those who have never had an issue with addiction, for you to smear their name and damage them in a permanent and indefinite way is such a cruel and heinous thing that should hold the highest level of accountability.